15th Day of October. Saint Teresa, Virgin. Saint Teresa, so greatly gifted by the Almighty, was born in 1515 at Avila in Spain, of not less pious than noble parents. Among other devout exercises, her parents were accustomed frequently to read pious books, and their daughter was taught to do the same as soon as she was able to read. Teresa soon became so much attached to this that she often retired with her brother Roderick to a solitary place in order to read more undisturbed. Though scarcely 7 years of age, she thus obtained so vivid a knowledge, as well of temporal as of spiritual things, that she sometimes would exclaim, as if in ecstasy, O eternity, to be tormented during a whole eternity, to rejoice during a whole eternity, to be without end in pain, to be without end in joy. Oh, who can find words for it? Whilst she read the lives of the saints, her heart became so inflamed with the desire to die for the honor of Christ, that in company with Roderick, she secretly left her father's home, intending to go to Africa to preach Christ among the Saracens, and thus earn the glorious crown of martyrdom. Although the two young adventurers were immediately pursued and brought back to their parents, yet the desire to die for Christ could not be torn from Teresa's heart. When, in the 12th year of her age, she lost her mother by an early death, Teresa cast herself down before an image of the Blessed Virgin, and in a flood of tears cried out, Mother of mercy, I choose thee for my mother. Take me, a poor orphan, among the number of thy children. The wonderful protection of the Queen of Heaven, which she enjoyed in the future, proved that her prayer was heard. Through the natural levity and forgetfulness of childhood, it happened that Teresa, after the death of her mother, gradually left off her devout reading, and instead of it, fell upon worldly books. She also became very intimate with one of her cousins, who was much addicted to vanity. This caused her to grow cold in her devotion. She no longer found pleasure in prayer, but became idle and vain, without, however, losing the innocence of her heart. When her pious father became aware of the change, he sent her into an Augustinian convent, where she soon came to the knowledge of her fault, and bitterly repented of it. That she did not fall into greater spiritual danger, she always ascribed to the special favor of the Divine Mother. She again began to read devout books, and thus brought back her former pious zeal, which had almost entirely died out, since she had spent so much time in reading romances. Soon after, she became dangerously sick, and her father took her home again. During her illness, she recognized more thoroughly than before the vanity of the world, and was filled with an intense desire to leave it entirely, and to serve God in the religious state. Her father was greatly opposed to this, but she secretly fled to the convent of the Carmelite nuns near Avila. This took place when she was in her 20th year. But no sooner had she left her father's house than she felt so ardent a desire to return to it that she trembled in all her limbs. Looking upon this as a temptation of Satan, she courageously continued her way, and when she had arrived at the convent, an entire change suddenly took place within her. Her sorrow and dread became joy and comfort. Thus did the Almighty recompense her self-control. Teresa began her novitiate with great zeal, continued in it, and ended by taking upon herself the usual vows. Some time later, however, she once more lost her fervor in the service of God, because she conversed too long and too often with people of the world, and thus neglected her prayers and lost her love for devout exercises. One day, going into church to pray, her eyes fell upon a picture of our Savior representing him covered with wounds. At the same moment, her inmost soul was deeply moved by the thought that Christ had suffered so much for her, and that she had hitherto been so ungrateful and disobedient to him. Her heart became so filled with grief that it seemed to her as if it would break. Hence, sinking down before the image, she began to weep bitterly over her inconstancy, and said, with the most perfect trust, Lord, I will not rise from the ground until thou hast bestowed sufficient strength on me, not to sin in future, but to serve thee faithfully and with my whole heart. This short but fervent prayer of Teresa was heard by the Almighty. Her heart was suddenly and forever changed. All affection for human beings was banished from it. Her love of God and her delight in prayer and other spiritual exercises renewed, and the resolution taken to continue henceforth in the same. From that hour, Teresa vacillated no more in the service of God, but persevered, with uninterrupted and daily increasing zeal, in the path of virtue and perfection. God afterwards revealed to her that she owed her conversion to the intercession of Saint Joseph and of the Blessed Virgin. Hence she sought also to obtain the grace of perseverance by their aid. To this end, she represented frequently to herself the example of Saint Magdalene and Saint Augustine, and thus animated herself against a relapse. She repented daily most bitterly of the faults of her past life, and endeavored to atone for them by wearing rough penitential garments, by scourging herself, and by other penances, although, according to the words of her confessors, she had not been guilty of great sin. One day, God showed her a terrible place in hell, saying that she would have been precipitated into it if she had continued in her frivolous conversations at the convent gate with people of the world, and in her neglect of devotional exercises. Her hair stood on end at this revelation, and her eagerness to serve God most faithfully, and also to persuade others to do the same, was newly awakened. For this reason, she determined to use all possible means in order to institute once more the original austerity of the Carmelites, from which, by consent of the spiritual authorities, they had somewhat departed. God himself inspired her with these thoughts, and promised her his aid in the execution of them. But as this was an undertaking which had never yet been attempted by a woman, it is easy to imagine the many and great obstacles she had to overcome. Many of the clergy and laity opposed her plans, and she was slandered and persecuted on account of them. But notwithstanding this, heaven so visibly assisted her that, before her death, she counted 32 new convents, either of men or of women, in which the religious of her order led a holy life, in the observance of all the severity of the original rule. Whoever reflects on the trouble and labor it must have cost Saint Teresa to carry out this great enterprise will not hesitate to pronounce her success a great miracle. It is impossible to describe the great virtues of this holy foundress, or the wonderful graces which God bestowed upon her. She possessed, among others, the gifts of prophecy and of reading the secrets of the heart. During her prayer, she frequently fell into ecstasy and was often seen surrounded by a divine light. Once she was heard to exclaim, "Ah, only one God, only one death, only one soul," the explanation of which words she herself gave afterwards as follows: "There is only one God. If we displease him, there is no other from whom to seek help. Man dies only once. If therefore his death is unhappy, there is no chance left to remedy the mistake. One soul only do we possess, and if this is lost, there is no hope of salvation." The vision she had of our Lord, of the Blessed Virgin, Saint Joseph, the holy angels and other saints were almost without number. In the last years of her life, seldom a day passed in which she was not favored with the sight of Christ in the Holy Sacrament. The Divine Mother herself instructed, comforted, and strengthened her on all occasions. She said of Saint Joseph that she never asked anything of him which she did not obtain. But notwithstanding these and other great graces, her humility was so deep that she called herself the greatest of sinners, and desired to be considered as such. She often said that she owed it to the especial grace of God that he had not, according to her deserts, precipitated her into hell. She hated all human praise, and it was her greatest delight to be abused, reviled, and slandered. She often begged God to withhold his gifts, as she had so often offended him, and made herself unworthy of his grace. Not less wonderful was her patience and desire to suffer. She said one day that during 40 years she had scarcely been 1 hour without pain, except at the time when she received Holy Communion, when the interior consolation she felt made her forget her bodily ailments. Incredible almost are the many and severe sicknesses with which she was visited by divine providence. Among these were violent pains in her side and joints, trembling in all her limbs, disgust of food, and a fever which troubled her for 5 long years. All these were increased by temptations and spiritual desolation, and also by many and great persecutions. But in all these trials, she never manifested the slightest impatience. On the contrary, she felt an insatiable desire to suffer still more. Hence she was frequently heard to exclaim, "Lord, either to suffer or to die. For life is too burdensome when I have nothing to suffer." During her maladies, she said with Job, "If we have received good things from the hands of the Lord, why should we not also be grateful for that which is evil?" She never manifested any dislike, much less hatred towards those who most unjustly slandered and persecuted her. On the contrary, she showed them a great deal of kindness and endeavored to be useful to them. Hence a certain bishop said, "Whoever wishes to be favored by Teresa must revile or injure her." She wept bitterly over the blindness of the heretics and offered many penances for their conversion. She also prescribed in her regulations that the religious of her order should offer prayers and other good works, in order that God might aid preachers and others who labor for the salvation of souls and the conversion of heretics and sinners. God one day showed her the joys of heaven, saying, "Behold, of what great treasures sinners deprive themselves." This increased more and more her zeal to further the conversion of sinners. To the poor and sick, she was like a tender mother. She offered for the souls of the departed many penances and prayers, thus opening the gates of heaven to a great many of them. In purity of mind and body, she was more an angel than a human being, for besides never having the least fault to reproach herself with in that regard, she had received from God the grace of being free from all unclean thoughts and temptations. Nevertheless, she employed all the means which are necessary or useful to preserve purity. Her other virtues, as her perfect obedience, her extreme poverty, her constant self-abnegation, her wonderful moderation in everything, and her great austerity, must be omitted for want of space. But of her love of God we feel obliged to speak, as in this virtue she seems to have reached the highest point which a human being can attain. And can it be wondered at? She herself saw that an angel pierced her heart with a burning arrow, as a sign of her intense devotion to the Almighty. Christ himself gave her his hand, saying, "In future shalt thou, as a true spouse, labor zealously for my honor." Nothing grieved her more painfully than when she heard that God, whom she loved so intensely, had been offended by others, and she avoided nothing so carefully as in the least to offend him. God was constantly in her thoughts, even in the midst of her occupations. To him she constantly raised her heart by short interior prayers, which she sent to heaven with such fervency, that the flames of divine love which burned within her were reflected on her countenance. The least fault she committed caused her many tears, and she made a vow, not only never to displease God by a voluntary venial sin, and to guard herself against every imperfection, but also constantly to endeavor to do what she knew was most agreeable to the Almighty. The Roman Breviary testifies that she died more from the greatness of her love for the Most High than from the pains of her sickness. She knew the hour of her death 8 years before it took place. When she felt it approaching, she wrote a most touching and beautiful letter to all the members of the convents she had founded, exhorting them to persevere in their fervor. After having most devoutly received the holy sacraments, she occupied herself with mental prayer. At length, the long-wished-for hour has come, in which I cannot offend thee any more, O my Lord, exclaimed she, the hour in which I shall see thee. Soon after, she thanked God that she had been born in the Catholic Church, and repeatedly said, I am a daughter of thy Church, I die a child of the Catholic Church. She was also frequently heard to say, O Lord, cast me not from thy face. A contrite and humble heart, O God, thou wilt not despise. Turning on one side, her arms crossed over her breast and pressing a crucifix to her heart, she prayed silently for some time and calmly expired, in the 68th year of her age, in 1582. Christ visibly appeared to her in her last hour, accompanied by his divine mother and many angels. She appeared in great glory to several of her absent friends, at the hour of her death. At the moment when she gave her soul to God, a dead tree, which stood before her cell, began to bud. Her holy body, from which a most delicious odor emanates, has remained incorrupt until this hour, and the relation of the many miracles which took place after her death fills several books. But what appears most worthy of our admiration in the life of this saint is that she, though a weak woman and almost always afflicted with sickness, could have written many books filled with more than human wisdom, worked so much for the honor of God and the salvation of souls, endured so many persecutions, wrongs, and slanders in her holy undertaking, and yet succeeded so well in what she had begun by divine inspiration. God manifested in her what a feeble human being can do with his aid, and what great works he can perform through feeble hands.